Welcome back to the podcast. Gabe, Giannis, and I, we are joined by Julien Pineau. Man, this conversation was absolutely enlightening, insightful. Julien, he has a really unique background. Obviously, he's been in the trenches. He's owned gyms. He's trained with sand. He's trained in MMA. He's trained in Jiu-Jitsu. He's been deep in the CrossFit space for years, and now he's putting on studies to help people who are autistic or dealing with mental health issues and PTSD and things of that nature. And he's actually doing a study here pretty soon in California with UCLA. So I was fascinated by this conversation, Gabe. I took a lot from it. And I just really enjoyed his insight. It was refreshing. Plus, he loves to train with sand. I know I do. As of lately, I love too.
Yeah, man. I mean, I mentioned this on the episode, but I was introduced to Julien a while back in StrongFit, and a lot of the stuff that he does with sleds and yokes and sandbags, especially back when, I was like really deep in like training for CrossFit, the sport. And I've mentioned this on the podcast. I actually sent an email today that I've gotten some cool replies of the role that kind of sandbags played in me, like getting over a really bad back injury. So I was excited to talk to him from like the training and sand perspective, but the whole like first half of the episode was a really cool conversation on something that I knew he had going on, but it was really interesting to get the backstory and how he got into this, like treating mental health through fitness and resilience. I mean, I wasn't expecting to have that conversation at all. And that was truly like really eye-opening. And I really appreciated his take and the approach that he's having towards, some of these really big issues. And also, dude, it was really inspirational to hear the why.
Dude, the why was super powerful, dude, with his brother and his mother. Like, I wasn't even, it's one of those things where it's like, it's tough to respond to that on a podcast, but I appreciate him sharing it. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, absolutely. What do you say when, that's the why, aside from like tip your hat and be like, dude, we need more people like that are like doing really good quality work to help people and have such a strong why and take that to make some positive. So anyway, love the episode. Really big fan. Can't wait to have him back on. We say that all the time with guests, but there's so many other things we could talk to him about. And I know people will love it. Absolutely. Well, as per usual, if you guys love this episode like we did, share with a friend and leave the podcast a rating and review. And I know that you guys probably, I don't know if you guys even fast forward to this part or whatnot, but it really does make a difference. It's super meaningful for us to read the reviews on the podcast. So if you could take 10 seconds, leave it a review, it helps the show, it helps us out. And hopefully you're getting a lot of value from these episodes. Go back, check out the other ones and keep training hard. Let's get into it. Okay.
So what we're trying to do is to create a new cognitive behavior therapy toward, in general, that can be applied right now to PTSD and autism, but hopefully to far more than that, right? So first we had to come up with what they call an invention. It's just so that you explain what is it that you're creating that is new, right? So it's a mix of reinforcement positive therapy that already exists with the movement-based, and then we're gonna talk about that. So we have the results, we know that it works. Now you have to make it approved as something psychiatrists could use for an assessment or for therapy. So in order to do that, you need a proof of concept study, which I'm going to do for the first 2 weeks of October. We already done study, but now we have to do it in a specific way to be approved. And the second we have those results, we'll do a big conference at UCLA with Dr. Nasser Hamadi, and we will announce to the world that the therapy is moving forward. And then from there, it goes for FDA approval so that it can be paid for by insurance. Welcome to the American system.
Wow. So can you just to kind of back up a little bit, can you tell us what you're doing? So I understand the study and how you have to create kind of like, it has to be done a certain way to get to then transition to the next step to get FDA approval. But what is it in particular that you're looking to do and how is it benefiting? I know that, I've heard you talk about specific things through the Mark Bell podcast and other stuff, but in particular, what is it that we're talking about here and what impact do you think it's going to have on people?
So the biggest thing is resilience, right? Because let me backtrack and explain a little bit what I mean by that. First of all, resilience is 7 times down, 8 times up. Why does this matter? So if you look at, you have 2 types of what they call mental health. So let's put depression, anxiety, all that stuff in it. You have 2 sides to it. There is no such thing as depression. You can have somatic or cognitive depression. So to make it, I'm going to oversimplify, you have depression from the head or from the body. Those are 2 different things. So for example, your mother dies, you go in a slump, it's very hard to get out of it, right? But your body crashes, you go in a slump, that's actually also considered depression, but that's a somatic depression. So for example, this is where visceral fat comes in. We know that the waist to hip ratio, right? The fat that you keep around the waist is actually highly inflammatory. Those inflammation levels, when they go too high, will crash everything. Now you're in the somatic depression. So there's a difference between cognitive and somatic, right? Always, right? So all mental health issues are either somatic or cognitive, right? Always, 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 always. I'm like, all right, so we know the cognitive part. What about the somatic? What triggers it? How do we come back from it, right? So that's been a lot of my work has been, what is the effect of X and Y on the nervous system? And more importantly, how do we lessen the symptoms? Once we fall into the somatic aspect, what do we do, right? And turns out exercise and resilience is the key to all that. So to build resilience means we fall 7 times, we get up 8 times. The problem is right now in society, if you see what they're trying to tell you is to not fall. Don't fall 7 times, fall 6 times. Fall 5 times, 3 times, 2 times, like we do with the kids. You might get hurt in the park, don't go there. Right, but then you never learn to fall. So therefore, you never learn to go back up. So then you get weaker. And so what you do, you keep taking away things, but then you get weaker and weaker. And as you get weaker, the overall stress gets larger because you're less capable of doing with it. So now you have to take out more stuff and then more stuff and then more stuff. So that's your pills, that's the therapy, that's all of that. What they're doing in a way is making the overall weaker by trying, it's a lot easier to sell that way, by trying to say, oh, let's do less. Let's calm you down. Let's down-regulate you at every step. Well, if you look on the somatic side, that is not how the body responds. The body responds to stress favorably or not, but the question is, how do I make the body respond to stress in a favorable way so that I can lessen the symptoms, because resilience is the key to everything. And so from a physical aspect, how do we do that? And so that's been my work. And it applies to all mental health symptoms pretty much.
So when you talk about the somatic and cognitive side of all these mental health conditions, I'm assuming, but correct me if I'm wrong, that the rise that we've seen in a lot of these things, right? Like you constantly read anxiety is going up, depression's going up. Is that really only the somatic side that's going up, or are both going up?
Also cognitive, there's both. But they are massive differences. And the problem is, only way to dealing with it is we're trying to deal from the cognitive side, and only by down-regulating people. We are missing part of the equation. Okay. So let me explain what I mean by also somatic, because even in that, you have 2 aspects. You have chronic versus acute. That are 2 different things. But first, let me give you an example. If you look at schizophrenia, right, what is called a positive symptom is you hear George V telling you to go hunt dragons, right? That's called a positive. A negative symptom is catatonia. You're in a ball and you can't move anymore. Right? We have measured that, and we have seen, for example, the levels of noradrenaline are very high in positive symptoms, very low in negative symptoms. Skin connectivity, so the sympathetic nervous system is jacked to the max in positive symptom and crashed down completely in negative symptoms. Now, lower that a little bit, and we go toward our bipolar people. You see people very high or very low. So kind of a little bit the same thing, but at a lesser degree. If you take to what is called depression, really it's called anxious depression, because you can be very high or very low. Not as much as bipolar, that is not as much as the schizophrenic symptoms. But at the end, you see kind of the same things. You see sympathetic jacked up or crashing down. And so there's an entire approach to that tells you that on the somatic side, if we differentiate acute and chronic, you start to see very specific thing emerging. So that's not to say the cognitive is not important, but it's mostly what we've been focusing on. So back in the day, you had Freud, that psychoanalysis was all cognitive. And then you have a guy named Reich, who was one of his students, 1920 Vienna, that started to talk about what was called a vegetative system, which is a nervous system back then. And for him, he was actually trying to go toward the somatic aspect. Turns out it's both that matter. But most of the work is done toward cognitive and down-regulation. We are not talking about hyper-regulation, like making you higher, not lower, to get out of chronic states, for example.
The reason I asked about cognitive versus somatic going up is I understand that we've gotten more sedentary, nutrition's gone down the range. So I can see that side of it getting worse and worse. Yeah. Why is the cognitive side also getting, why is there more of the cognitive side, or are they tied together?
If your body is going down the drain and crashing, how long can your mind keep up? Right. So if you're in the somatic depression, how long before cognitive? Remember, we're talking about the nervous system, right? Which means it's your contact to the outside world. It's the data you're collecting. So you put glasses with a nasty filter on. How long before your mind starts reacting to that?
Yeah. And that's so with your study that you want to be doing here in the United States here soon, please correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're looking to do is show the balance between physical training and not only down regulation, but also intensity, effort, et cetera, and the benefit it could have.
So what I'm trying to show is that an acute response to stress is the key to resilience. That is the key to being able to deal somatically and cognitively to most problems. I'm sorry to tell everybody, but it comes down to you being stronger, not that idea that you can make. You remember that old saying, don't ask for the world for the charge to be lighter, ask for stronger shoulders.
So I like what you're saying. I mean, I agree with the acute, like, you know, you have to basically expose yourself to this adversity and whatnot, but what role then in modern day do you feel like we're talking about physical fitness, physical training, but what role do you think exposure to hot and cold, or yes, what role do you think medication plays in this, like modern day Western medication and even Eastern, like what role does that play? How about psychedelics and things like that?
You have to understand how the body works, right? You have two cycles. You have pathogenesis cycle and what is called a salutogenesis cycle. So pathogenesis cycle is when you get sick and what the body does. But then when you're out of that, you need to start a salutogenesis cycle, which is a healing cycle. So a healing cycle is composed of 3 different stages, right? So it's at the mitochondria level, but turns out not all mitochondria is the same. There's 3 different types and they do 3 different things. One is inflammation, one is proliferation, so spreading of the cell, but then one is differentiation. If any of those stages get stuck somewhere, you cannot heal fully. So most of the chronic diseases that you see is an illness comes in, but we are not fully healing from it. So you get stuck in a loop of inflammation, which is the first stage. Does that make sense? So you see most people have a high levels of inflammation continuously because they can never finish the cycle. So if you introduce pollution and stuff like that, you basically create an illness you never heal from. And so the accumulation of things like that can be tremendous. In order to finish the healing cycle, you need the body to be able to do specific things, to be in a specific type of shape. And this is where the acute response, ATP production and all that stuff comes in. So yes, after that, I don't have a problem with drugs. I don't have a problem with any of that, except if they stop you from moving forward. So for example, Ozempic, that is going to be the next opioid crisis in the US. It's going to be a disaster that is going to create a chemical anorexia amongst young girls. You know it's coming. The problem with that drug is you take it, you basically do not eat anymore. It's a side effect of the actual drug is because it slows down everything in your stomach. We're not even going to talk about the gut biome and when it does do that. We're just going to say it cuts down hunger. So now you are losing weight through starvation. That means you mostly lose muscle first, right? So you are losing weight. Mostly muscle, right? On a population that obviously doesn't train, otherwise we will not have this conversation. So doctors tell you the only way we can counteract that is by making people train. So people that wouldn't train before now are going to train while they're starving with no desire to train, even less desire to train because now they're starving, while on a drug that does not make it necessary for them to train anymore. Right. So that we're going to win that for sure. And now the problem is you're 1 year, you can't eat anything, you can't taste it. Basically, there's a disaster. If you come off of it, you have less muscle than when you started. Your metabolism is shot. Your stomach is not functioning. You're going to get the weight back plus which is what we see already.
Which is also,
so now you have to go back on Ozempic. And so
which is also exactly what they...
Right, my problem is I'm dealing with human beings. And I know what comes next out of behavior. That's all. So is Ozempic in itself a bad thing? We'll see, because we're still trying to figure out the side effects. In specific cases, it's better than dying of being obese in the next 2 weeks. Yes, but that's not the only people that are going to take it now, are they? And so
we talked about that on the... Yeah, we talked about this a little bit on the show a couple weeks back, and just our opinions on it. And so I'm curious, though, just to kind of, I hate to even use the word back up because we just kind of got right into this, but what brings you to want to pursue this so much? What is your background that got you inspired to create a study on this? And then I have more questions on the mental health side, but just to back up for a moment, why are you so inspired to, in my opinion, I mean, you're basically dedicating your life at this point to this. What got you to this point, and what's your background?
Yeah, because I'm super curious to that. Same exact question. I had a little bit of background. Like, I first got introduced to you probably back in around 2019, because I had really hurt my back, and my coach, Dennis Marshall, back at CrossFit Garden City. Yeah, you know Dennis. Yeah, Dennis was like, he got introduced to you and StrongFit and sandbags. And before that, like, sandbags weren't even a thing. Like, CrossFit gyms didn't have sandbags, and we started doing the yoke carries, the farmers. Yeah. And let me tell you, man, I mean, it was a huge reason that I recovered from my back injury and now feel better than ever before. But that was my first introduction to you and StrongFit and that type of training. And I know you were helping games athletes. You were working with Kristen Holte, doing some great work there. So
the whole Invictus team. So I train everybody. But
so I'm really curious, like Jason said, how you went from there to now, right? Like helping people with mostly performance.
They asked me that many times. Yeah. All right. So let me explain a few things. So I'll explain why I do this. First of all, I'm on the autism spectrum, but I'm on the savant side. So you will not know. There are different type of autistic people. You have what most people refer autism is ASD, autism syndrome disorder. That's a disorder, not autism. Right? Just like being obese is not hunger. You know what I mean? It's a disorder based on with hunger. So autism has different clusters, and one of them is the savant side. You know those fucking kids that can see patterns everywhere? Yeah, I'm one of them. So that means that I'm very good at completing unfinished patterns. Like you see unfinished patterns, you need about 90%, whatever number, right? I'm just making them up. You would need 90% to go, hey, right. A savant needs 50%, 40%, 30%, depending on how good he is, where we can get a lot of information out of very little, right? So it's actually a way of learning that is different, which means I can't memorize shit, but I remember everything. So I remember every study that I read, but not the study because I can't memorize anything. But I remember what the study was about and how it connects to another one. So I'm very, very good at connecting dots, basically. I've always has. So school has failed me miserably, as you can imagine, because I cannot do the school system. That's exactly the opposite way of my brain working. So even though I'm fairly smart, I could never go through the school system. So, but at the same time, so you understand, I finished Freud by the time I was 18, I think. Lacan, Jung, Adler, all of them. I finished Nietzsche by the time I was 19. So I've always read tremendously, right? At the same time, I was doing every sports I could do. So really what sport gave me is a peace of mind I could not find anywhere else. So I was always attracted to sports, movement, and stuff like that. Competition was hard because of the social aspect of autism, but I've always loved pushing the boundaries of what I could do. And then we're going back to resilience and acute, and so we can talk about that, right? So on one side, I was always very, very, very interested in the human body. And in a way, I'm sure it was to explain why was my brain different from everybody else. Right, so that's on one side. On the other side, I owe a debt to someone that I will never be able to repay. And so I need to help as many people as I can in the meantime. I was raised by my brother, my older brother. He was 18 years older than me. He taught me to read. He's the one who taught me chess. He put me on Nietzsche. He's the one who did all this. And he had his own demons and he didn't make it. So he died when he was 40, I was 20. And I could not help him. So I have a debt to pay. So that's why my life is toward that.
Man. And so now more like from like how did you first get turned on to, okay, there's clearly a problem that needs to be solved here, not with performance and athletes, but with mental health and that side. And when did you first like start connecting the dots of like, hey, this is something, just looked around.
No, I don't want to get gloomy on the show, but I grew up with do you know what Munchausen syndrome is by proxy?
I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar. I don't know anybody.
Well, you see a lot of it right now actually happening. It's parents that torture their kid in order to get attention. Yeah, I grew up in, mothers or stepmothers mostly. It's a woman thing. I grew up in that basically. So my mother was excessively abusive on many different levels. And so I was shown very early on what true crazy is. And what people understand what true crazy is the randomness of craziness, of true madness. There's a randomness aspect to it that is very, very scary. So between all of that, mental health was always something. I was like, I don't understand that. And I'm someone who needs to understand. So all that together, and my brother struggling and all of that. So all that, I was like, all right, that's what I'm doing.
Did your father also, was he around? Where did you grow up at? Because right now you're in Brazil, but where did you grow up?
So I was in Paris until I was 14, and then I ran away from home. Ended up with my uncle in Africa, in Ivory Coast, where I stayed for a year. I was the only white student in that school ever. 400 kids, only white kid ever there. Because all the other teachers' kids were going to the other high school. And my uncle was like, no, you're coming with me. I was like, okay. And so only white student ever in that. Yeah, I'm 14. They're all 20 something with kids because they go to school later. And so, I grew up really fast.
So your father wasn't present. Your mother struggled from, what's that? Yeah. And your mother struggled from mental health issues and same with your brother. It sounds like what's that?
Not if you ask her, but that's another problem.
Yeah. And so I could totally, now this picture that's coming together for me, like I could totally see how this is something that you're, making your life's work. And so I'm curious from a mental health perspective, and then we could, there's a bunch of other stuff I want to talk about, like your jiu-jitsu and, talking about MMA gyms and CrossFit. I listened to an episode you were on. I found that really interesting, but with the mental health side, how much of it, I mean, really, I think it's key that obviously you get the body to a good point, right? Where it could reduce inflammation, all these different things. But I mean, even if you were fit, capable, still there's people that struggle so much there. So what is your solution to that? Is it obviously additional therapy, et cetera?
But it's not just being fit, because you're going to have to define for me what fit means, right? It's the process of getting fit that will teach you lessons that then you can use toward the cognitive aspect. Back to resilience. Resilience is physical, but mental as well. You've done jiu-jitsu. When the guy is on top of you, choking you, there's a resilience there where your coach tells you, just relax. Yeah, sure. Yeah. When the guy is trying to kill you, you go like, breathe. I'm like, I got this, coach. No problem. Professor. What is the first thing that happens in jiu-jitsu? I'll tell my story. So I'm watching, Royce Gracie, because 98. Ooh, 97 even, Jesus Christ. No, I'm not that old. That's not true. So I'm way back then, right? And I see Royce Gracie beating the shit out of everybody. I'm like, that's a scary man. I don't like to be scared. I need to learn this. So I go into my first lesson, and I got a 200-pound guy on top of me, mounting me, choking me, and I went, ah! And I must have changed colors because the guy went, ooh! And so I'm trapped in an elevator on fire, and it's hard. I think that's basically a panic attack, I'm pretty sure. But that's the craziest thing that I lost all control. I went like this, couldn't breathe, battery acid through my veins, and I'm like, what the fuck was that? And I was like, all right, I don't know what that was, but I know one thing. If I can control that feeling, I'll never be scared again in my life. So I'm coming back tomorrow. And so that's what I did. I came back the next day, got my ass kicked again. And then that lasted 4 years, but that's another problem. So you know what I learned that day is to become resilient mentally so that I could face fear, yes, physically, but mentally as well. And as your teacher tells you, to breathe through getting beat up. If you can do that, there's a lot less things in life that will scare you after. Live in Africa, that works too, by the way. Go live in Africa. That shit they're all freaking out in the West will make you laugh, but will make you smile after. Because I'm sorry, most of the problem they're all bitching in the West. I lived in Africa, I live in Brazil. I'm sorry, you don't have it that hard. Perspective
is everything, right?
I think it would help.
Yeah. So I'm before we move on from this mental health side. So if you can boil down, so what is the protocol then that you're suggesting here to get someone started?
Resilience.
Like how would this actually work?
Resilience. Now we have to talk about how we can do that. So there are, for example, with what we're doing with Dr. Nasser, is there's two sides. There's a RFPP, which is a reinforcement of positive reinforcement, if you want, right? So in a way, I'm going to oversimplify this. Sorry, Dr. Nasser, is, like negative self-talk will get you down. There's no doubt about that. And once you get into that cycle of, in a way, down-regulating yourself mentally and always like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. You know what Henry Ford say, whether you believe you can do something or cannot, you're right. So positive reinforcement psychiatry is a field of psychiatry that I believe is very, very important because, again, the point is not to fall less. The point is to get back up, stronger, faster, more, right? So that positive reinforcement is very important in that aspect, right? So there's a whole work there of no perspective, as you say, move forward, because look, it's not like you have a choice anyway. So let's move forward. There's an intent into that. There's a mental discipline. There's almost a way of looking at things that matters tremendously. So that's very much a psychiatric approach to that, right? Then after that is how do we create resilience from people like, all right, so that's where the chronic versus acute comes in. Most people train in a chronic state. Turns out you need an acute state in order to create specific responses from your body. That's where the positive reinforcement comes, by the way, because when I get you from chronic to acute, you're not going to like it. And your first instinct is to go like, I don't do that. Right, so now positive reinforcement, I need you to be able to push the sled or whatever in order to create specific reaction from your nervous system that will lead to somatic, to interoception, to specific states that will lead you to a greater overall resilience. So obviously nothing is that simple, but you get the idea.
All right, we're going to take a quick pause from the podcast here to talk about the Train Hard app and everything we have coming up in the month of August. So we just launched a SAND program. So for anyone that's just been on the fence about joining and doesn't quite have the access to the equipment, maybe you don't have the time, the space to dive into Force Flex and the other programs that are a part of the Train Hard app, we've taken away all the excuses. We now have a program. It's 10 weeks, 4 workouts per week that require one piece of equipment alone that you can also get right on the Train Hard shop. We are making it so easy. We partnered up with GoRuck. We have their sandbags available on the Train Hard shop. These things are so durable. It's going to last you for years and years. So you should feel good about making the investment with such a versatile piece of fitness equipment that you can also take with you on trips so that you have no excuses and you never let your momentum get to zero. So the SAND program is 10 weeks, 4 workouts per week. There are intervals, there's mixed modal days, there's longer conditioning days, there are short, spicy workouts. You get a little bit of everything so that in those 10 weeks, you can absolutely improve your fitness, improve your conditioning, improve your body composition with a program that's so simple and only requires one piece of equipment. So if you've been on the fence, you now don't have an excuse. Grab the SAND program from the Train Hard shop. It's also available as part of the Train Hard app. So if you're on the Train Hard app and you just want to change things up, boom, you have access to SAND there. We also have a new cycle coming up in Flex that is going to get you so strong. So we have nothing but good things coming here in the month of August. Check out the Train Hard app, check out the Train Hard shop, check out the SAND program. Let's get back to the podcast.
Does that apply also, what you just said, would that apply to the youth as well, in your opinion?
100%. Like a lot of the work we do is with teenagers, right? That are suicidal teenagers, if you want. So a lot of the work is toward that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll talk more about with this offline with you. I have a lot more questions on that particular subject. Go ahead, Gabe. Yeah.
For example, just to give you an idea, like we have a ratio that we do between the parasympathetic and sympathetic. That's measurable, right? That ratio tells you how you handle stress. You know, you heard about neuroplasticity all the time, is the capacity to go back and forth. Well, it's the same thing with the nervous system. It's not whether you can go sympathetic or parasympathetic. It's how you come back between the two whenever the environment requires you to. Right, that's what matters. So the ratio parasympathetic, sympathetic is what matters. What we do is we test on a violent video kids and we see what their ratio is. Can you take stress and come back from it, right? And we've seen that after the type of training that we do, then you're able to receive stress and come back from it very much faster based on the therapy that we are developing. So that's on a conscious level, that's on an unconscious level, and you see the reaction of the nervous system before and after the training session, and that tells you that your capacity for stress has gone up. That's resilience. You're capable of going back up better, faster.
Is part of that because when you have the acute stress via exercise, it like people know that it's over and that they're going to be okay? Like, is that a part of the benefit there versus some of the things in life feeling very like?
Yeah, it also creates perspective, right? I can kill you on a sled. Like you go like, I'm not going to make it, right? And 10 minutes later you go, oh my God. And then an hour later you go, and then next day you go, oh, I'm fine. And so there is an entire aspect to that where it's also very important to give people that suffer from panic attack. I would have to go into very specifics in this because breathing is involved, alkaline versus acidic, lactate, all that stuff. But the idea is a lot of people that have panic attack, panic disorder, right? Go, for example, into, we know that hyperventilation, right, will trigger a panic attack. So most people, to protect themselves from that, go into a chronic state of hyperventilation, because they're actually trying to protect themselves from a panic attack, from an acute hyperventilation. The problem is that triggers other issues that will create a panic attack anyway. But the point is they can't take the acute, so they go toward chronic, right? If I can do it in the gym and I can show you that an acute response you can actually control, and it will not get you into a panic attack, it will get you in an elevated state, but not a panic attack, because there's a difference. Then I showed you that there's a measure of control, of hope toward your own panic attacks, because that's what the problem is when you see with, suicidation and all that stuff, is actually there is no hope. The next panic attack is going to wreck me. There's nothing I can do about it. Right. But if I can get you very close to it and show you there's a way to come back, or that the almost panic that you feel at the exercise actually does not relate to danger necessarily, I give you a better perspective on it, and I give you a control over the panic attack, and then you reduce the problem by 60% just by showing that there is a way to deal with it. Because most of the problem with panic attacks is the feeling that there is nothing you can do about it. It's true if it's a somatic one, for example.
And the time domain that we're talking about here, but the acute stress, what time domains? I mean, are you talking, bike intervals, sled intervals? We're talking 30, we're talking 1 minute, we're talking just exhausting the system.
Yeah. It depends a little bit of what I'm looking for, because there is sometimes I need to have an acute response on the nervous system. So in that case, I might do under a minute. Sometimes I'm trying to go past the threshold. So that might take me a little bit longer, but no matter what, it's going to be short and intense, for sure.
And what role?
Unless I need you to face yourself, and then I have a 10-minute, what we call a Q-1, where, because you have a problem with mental health, but that's something you recognize everywhere, is life gives you a 6. We have a scale from 1 to 10. Life gives you a 6. Most people will respond with a 10 that are on the anxiety issue or stuff like that, will respond with a 10 or a 2. Right? They either freak out or they crash completely. Right. But life is a 6. So I can introduce a stress, let's say on an airdyne for 10 minutes with, like when you're on an airdyne, you go a little bit too fast. You have that voice that tells you like, what are we doing? Because the shit is getting real. Right. So right below that, And I'm going to keep you there for 10 minutes-ish, a bit. Some people will last 4, but let's say 10 minutes, right? And I'm going to look at your reaction because I want you to get to that threshold where you're very uncomfortable physically. Now you're getting very uncomfortable mentally. Out of that, but basically it's a stress at a 6 and you don't like it, right? So now, are you going to react with an 8 or with a 4? So are you going to speed up or slow down? And I'm not going to let you do that. I'm going to keep you at the same pace, the same very uncomfortable feeling in order to teach you to deal with a 6 and not to deal with a 6 with a 10 or a 2. So there's also that aspect. But most of the training that I do is to spike so that we don't go into panic attacks.
And my last question on this, because I could talk about this with you all day long, is fitness compared to cold exposure.
Right.
What role does cold exposure play? Because I would say that they both have very similar attributes in terms of creating a very acute response.
Except for 2 simple things. One is passive, the other one is not. So that's a problem. And second of all, how do you keep getting the water colder once you have adapted to it? How do you increase the stimulus? Because remember, resilience means 7 times down, 8 times up. At some point, the water, you get used to it, you don't fall anymore. So it's not resilience training. So that might work at first, yes. But eventually, how do you create a fall? With exercise, with fitness, I can put more weight, I can make you pull faster. There's a number of variables I can create. With cold exposure, what are the variables that I create in order to keep the thing going? And also it's passive by nature, which I do not like. I'm not against
passive in terms of like you're entering into this thing. So obviously you're becoming more resilient. You're just, but you're not doing anything. You're just sitting. Okay.
Right. So it's the same thing when you do jiu-jitsu stuff and you let the guy beat up on you. The point is to start fighting back. So how do I fight back a cold water? I can fight back a weight. I just pull on it. And then finally, by the way, there's an abstract nature of it that is a problem as well. I would have to go a bit deeper on that. When I pull on a sled with a rope, the sled is over there, it comes here. I won, right? There's no abstract. Now, on the cold exposure, define success for me.
Well, yeah, if you enter in with the goal of going for 4 minutes and you achieve 4 minutes, that would be success.
That's success, right? So what if I just get really cold? But I'm like this for 4 minutes and I just endure it. Did I win or did I lose?
I'd say you won because you achieved the goal.
All right, objective based. That sounds very abstract in nature to me. Did I create, you know what I mean? Like, so that's where we get into, again, I'm not against it. I'm not saying it doesn't work, it does. I'm saying eventually you start to adapt to the stimulus and then what? And I've seen, because I deal with people, right? A lot of people getting into cold water because they were told to do so, not because, like, Brian McKenzie talks about the way you went to go into the water, to breathe a certain way. It's an exposure on everything. I've seen plenty of people doing it because someone said so, and it looks more like a torture session than it does a therapy session. I got to tell you. And so the intent is important. With exercise, you pulling on the rope, the success is simpler to define, and the person has to be active. If they just endure and not pull on the rope, it's not moving. So we're comparing. I'm not saying it's not good. I'm saying I like to be able to control the variables a little bit better. That's all.
No, I think you're bringing up good points. Like, hey, they're both great, but you're bringing up the one that I like in particular is that you are in control of you're not being passive. I think and obviously
you can't make the water colder after a while.
Right.
So let's say you do it for 6 months, then what?
Well, yeah, and you can't just keep going 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes. Eventually, it just becomes what you do. Yeah,
you're gonna die. You're gonna get hypothermia. So there's always that limit that is imposed by the thing itself. Whereas with exercise, you can increase. There's different variables you can increase over time. So I do believe over time, fitness will always beat drugs and cold exposure and all passive therapies.
Now, does everyone need intensity in their fitness? And how would you define what everyone needs to see on like a weekly basis from like an intensity perspective?
They should have at least one session. Pushing the fuck it button should be at least once a week.
I like that. Pushing the
You've
fuck
been
it.
there, there's 5 more reps. I mean, I've seen Jason in competition. There's 5 more reps. Fuck it. I'm doing them anyway. First CrossFit Games.
I've been there a few times.
Pick it up again. I'm picking it up again, bitch. Do one more. I do one more. And that's how you won. You need to do that once a week. I believe that's why CrossFit was so successful. It wasn't because of Murph and hero workouts. It was because 13 clean and press for time. Grace, Helen, Jesus Christ. How much pain can you take in 8 minutes? That was CrossFit, man.
Yeah. And so this brings up what you talked about on a podcast that actually Dennis sent me that I thought was super interesting when you were breaking down, High Rocks being CrossFit for pussies and like there being like,
it was a joke. I don't
Oh, of course. No.
Yeah. We're both signed up for a High Rocks right now.
Yeah. We're both doing a High Rocks.
Dude, everybody in Europe is doing High Rocks. So all my coaches are High Rocks people as well. And I'm actually liking the High Rocks better for 20 minutes plus. So anyway, so I was making a joke. But
No.
Guys are pussies, let's be honest. But anyway.
No, but I think that, so this all brings up a good point in that, like, okay, people need that, fuck it, send it session once a week. Then there's the longer stuff, which, if you want to call like more High Rocks 20 necessary as well.
Yes.
But then I guess, how does all that balance out into, what the average person needs, and how much is that better than people
Can I use MMA to explain?
Yeah. I wanted to go into that because it was a good analogy that I know Jason has some thoughts.
MMA started back then was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You guys don't remember because 98, 99, 2000, right? Rickson Gracie was saying, don't learn boxing, don't learn wrestling, Jiu-Jitsu. And you didn't even do no gi Jiu-Jitsu back then.
Yeah, he was in a gi in the first couple of UFC. Yeah.
Hoist was, and Rickson fought without a gi, but trained with the gi and told everybody to train with the gi. They didn't even have leg locks back then.
And just for clarity's sake, for people who are unfamiliar, a gi is, for lack of a better term, like a robe that you put on. And the disadvantage there is that,
judo thing.
Judo. The disadvantage that people can grab onto it, right, instead of being in a no gi situation. So, but they could also use it against it.
It's a problem. Anyway, so back then, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with a gi, which is insane looking back, right? But because it's so superior and so new that no one can deal with it, it is MMA. You do MMA when you do Jiu-Jitsu. All right. You fast forward, and at some point, no, it's not enough. You start to learn wrestling. Then from there, the kickboxers got, and now we all train without gi. And then the leg lock starts to come in because you start to integrate all forms of martial arts because it is a form of fighting. So a guy come off the street doesn't mean he's going to the UFC, but if you want to learn to fight, you're going to have a base of Thai boxing, a base of wrestling, and a base of grappling. You need to have all three. Depending on what is it you're looking for, you're going to start to go more toward one than the other. But if we're talking about fighting, you need all three. Now, you can be just a jiu-jitsu guy with a gi. It's great. You're not learning to fight as a whole, right? You just like to do jiu-jitsu, and that's fine. But if you want to talking about martial arts and learning to fight, then there is a base that is to be acquired in Thai boxing, in wrestling, and in jiu-jitsu. That makes sense, right?
Yeah,
we can talk about
agree.
How many times of each per, depending on your goals and all of that. But you need the entire base, right? CrossFit arrives in the 2000s, right? And it's kicking the ass of everybody, especially on the women's side. Women make progress we have never seen before. Greg Glassman has created a system that has done more for women in the fitness industry than anyone else combined, let's be honest. The strength while being fit, the muscle while being lean and everything that those women acquired between 2000 and 2010 is absurd. I was there when Lindsay Valenzuela did the first 200-pound snatch. Like I was in LA, she was there. It was all over Facebook that day. People were like, oh my God. And fast forward 5 years and everybody's snatching 200, which is for women is an insane number. Anyway, so CrossFit is there and whoops everybody and is going like the guys are not nearly as strong, comparatively speaking, in their progress as the women. But if we look at women, what they're able to accomplish, it's absurd. So it's a jiu-jitsu of MMA. And back then, all you have to do is CrossFit. Okay. But if you develop, there's a base that needs to be developed better now. That is boxing, wrestling, and all of that stuff. And that's where I see CrossFit a certain way, which is truly that 5 to 20 minute workout thing is where CrossFit always shone, right? If you start to go past in a Murph and everything, High Rocks is better. It's better organized because it's organized by cardio people that just like to run a lot and, you know, push the sled, but not too hard. And they don't want too many skills. And the barbell, it's like farmer's walk for 400 meters. But anyway, so that actually works better for that 40-minute workout. That being said, below 5 minutes, we had grace in CrossFit and stuff like that. But you go powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, like very short, but then you get strongman that is like 90 seconds. What I do is more like minute to 5 minutes. And then you have 5 to 20, which is CrossFit. And then you get High Rocks. And that's MMA. That's functional fitness. So depending a little bit on what the average person wants, they still need some High Rocks. I would say mostly CrossFit and some intensity at least once a week.
Yeah. So just kind of highlighting what you're talking about. I think that, you're right. So I started off in Muay Thai. I did Muay Thai for a couple of years, loved it. I've been doing Jiu-Jitsu now for 8-9 years. So obviously I love that.
I remember your first competition.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then my wrestling is definitely an area where I need to continue to work on. Dude, wrestling, for people who are unfamiliar with it, you know, wrestling is tough. It's tricky because when you decide to shoot on somebody and make a move, you got to commit 100%. It takes some balls.
Keep going. Don't stop.
It takes some balls to hit somebody with the, you know, blast double. And anyways, but to your analogy, you know, CrossFit, I've heard you say this. I wrote it down, like that CrossFit isn't a methodology. It's you said it.
It's a training session.
Yeah.
I believe so. I believe we saw most of the progress out of a very specific type of training.
It's a training system, not a methodology.
I believe
right? So to your point though, if you're comparing it to MMA and you know, in general, I would agree. Like early on, someone comes in, they have this jiu-jitsu skills and they just show off and be like, bro, there's nothing you could do. Right. And then even when, you know, Danaher starts adding in these leg entanglements, I mean, if you don't know how to defend them, you're screwed. It's just going to happen.
Yeah,
so CrossFit comes out and, you know, I was fortunate to be a part of this, you know, area with that 5 to 20 minute time domain that just elicited a phenomenal response.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you say, I mean, based on, you know, the definition of work capacity across broad times and modal domains, wouldn't you say that CrossFit by definition is a methodology that is supposed to be across a bunch of time domains?
100% is supposed to be. In the practical term, the progress of CrossFit were shown in a very specific time domain. My point when I say it's not a methodology, of course it is, but it's shown in a very specific area, right? Okay, what is a normal back squat for CrossFit men?
I mean, 500 pounds is a good, number. And I'm talking about CrossFit Games. I'm not talking about like.
Even CrossFit Games, you're being a bit generous. But let's say 500 pounds, right? Yeah. It's a joke for anybody in football, wrestling on the men's side, stuff like that, right? They squat quite often. They do a lot of Olympic weightlifting, right? Their squat is low for people who do as much Olympic weightlifting and squatting as they do. Right? CrossFit with men has not resulted in out of this world strength gains. The deadlift is low, the bench is low, the squat is low. Women are better, but now we do a 12-minute workout. No one in the world is going to beat a CrossFitter. I take anybody. Like, it's ridiculous. CrossFitters, you give them do anything for 12 minutes, they will murder people. So yes, it is a methodology. The results have not proven that methodology works on all energy systems. Let me put it this way. CrossFit Games, 5K, 20 minutes. Sorry, that's a joke. I did it in 21 minutes at 40-year-old, being 108 kilo, 240 strongman.
How much of that?
On the 5K now, on the top dudes at High Rocks, they're in the 15 minutes.
Right.
18 to 15 minutes on a 5K. Those 3 minutes, it's a galaxy of difference. It's 2 seconds on a sprint.
So you're making the argument that CrossFit is by design, they're still coming out as the best at like this 7 to 20 minute time domains. But if you take them to a lower time domain or a higher time domain, they might still have capacity, but they're not the best in the world is basically, and now what role does complexity play in that to you? So, I'd make the argument that, the best CrossFitters in the world are people that could take a moderately complex skill, like a clean and jerk or snatch, combine that with a moderately complex gymnastics skill, and no one else in the world will get close to them if you combine those two. But independently, you know what I mean?
Yes and no. Like you take some of those Olympic weightlifters, they can squat 25 times a fuck ton of weight. I got to tell you, like they'll beat any CrossFitters on earth. So it depends a little bit, but yes, but it's that type of work thing where they excel at. Also, like not everybody works the skill on the barbell as that, or those types of reps and stuff like that. But my point is that's exactly what CrossFit does the best, is exactly that type of effort. Is that. The second you start to go into like, why are you clean and jerking that much with a front squat that is that low? Like, I remember one Rich Froning had an overhead squat that was very close to his front squat.
Yeah.
Is that weird? Well, I mean, look at how much Olympic weightlifting you guys were doing back then. You did a fuck ton, right? So you should have had higher, not Olympic weightlifting number, higher back squat and front squat. Right. But look at your rowing time on that fucking marathon thing that Dave Castro tried to kill everybody on. You had a really good time. That's impressive. Right. So CrossFit has built a machine type, but of a very specific type thing. I've put CrossFit people in Jiu-Jitsu because I want everybody to do Jiu-Jitsu. And that didn't work out that well at first. Like you were strong, so you could use that, right? But I had CrossFitters in Jiu-Jitsu, like they could do rounds forever, but they couldn't explode when necessary. There was a type of effort they really had to adapt to. So they had a great cardiovascular base that helped. But you can tell like the energy system was just not, they didn't train that way, basically.
So for someone, the average person that's, been at a CrossFit gym now for, over 2 years, over 3 years, what should
mark, man?
Yeah. What should they be then doing a little bit more than to really progress? Like, how would I change from going to the CrossFit gym and doing that programming, 4 or 5 times a week? What should I take out and replace with to actually start progressing also in CrossFit?
Honestly, go back to old school CrossFit when everybody started. Go back to where Greg Glassman put forward 1 workout a day. Go do Helen. If you can't do Helen under 9 minutes, you got work to do. If you can't do Cindy under 15, 17 rounds, you got work to do. Can you do Grace under 2 minutes? Can you? There's a bunch.
Yeah, those hurt though. Those hurt. That's why I love it.
Yes, they do. Right, friend. Who wants to do friend now? By the way, you don't hear about friend anymore.
I mean,
I wonder why.
We don't even talk about we don't even say that name. I've probably done friend 50 times, and I refuse to do it again.
That bitch died about 6 years ago, right? And she was buried, and no one wants to see her coming back. Because we all do 30-minute workouts, because it's easier to sell, because it doesn't hurt as much, because let's be honest, you know what people love is 30-minute workout with 8 exercises. You know why? Because you transition the shit out of it. Ooh, let me go over there. Ooh, let me go over here. It's like,
But pulling on that thread, you were saying that, you got to give the red line gas at least once a week. Yeah. I think one of the things that CrossFit did extremely well is added a clock. And even for me, I mean, I still throttle it hard all the time. And I have a very difficult time feeling like I'm getting results unless I'm throttling it, just because I came up with that system for so long. 100%. But to your point, like if you're hitting Grace's and Helen's, which is a 400-meter run and some pull-ups and kettlebell swings, I mean, these movements move large load, long distance, and you're putting in your best effort and you're trying to beat the clock. But if you're doing that, so would you say too much intensity is too much intensity? Like how often is too much now in that time domain we're talking about?
This is where we're talking about high rocks, right? Because the problem is you take Helen, it's 8 minutes. You take those CrossFit workouts that are under 20 minutes. Even Dave Castro once said, I don't need you to do 40-minute workout because there's nothing that I can't do in 40 minutes that I can do in 20. In the sense of like 20 minutes full intensity, we good. There's always that moment where you take that 20, you try to push it to 30. It doesn't work like that. The human body and everything doesn't work like that. So all you're going to do is burn people out. And they're going to start to strategize, and again, they start to slow down, and then and the intensity goes down, down, and down, and down, and down, and down, right? So that doesn't mean you can go balls to the wall continuously, just like you can't deadlift 3 times a week, right? But you cannot just do 30-minute workout, always continuously strategized, because you're never pushing the intensity high enough. So I still think you should do once a week the very intense workout. We can do 1 or 2 high rocks, 30, 40-minute workout and everything, looking at the clock, but there's a lot of transition. The strategy comes in, you're always out of breath, but basically you're doing a hard cardiovascular workout. And then in the center, you got the Helen, you got all those horrible workout, 12 minutes, couplets and triplets, where you just murder yourself. And you do 1 a day, like back in the day, 5 days a week, and you're fine.
And what role does, go ahead, Gabe, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, it's funny because like no one is doing that for so many obvious reasons. Like it sucks. I also think that for people that have been doing this for a while, you almost get discouraged by the fact that like, you're not necessarily going to maybe beat your time at those workouts anymore, but that shouldn't be the point, right? The point should be that you need to get that very specific stimulus. Because I know if I went back to, doing the Helens and the Graces of the world, I probably wouldn't like beat the best time I ever did in those workouts, but I know that they're very important. And I think I'm overall a lot fitter, a lot stronger now than I was back then.
What you're talking about is the entertainment factor that came in, and mostly because of social media. You want cardiovascular work? I got a workout for you. 3 rounds, 400 meters. Each 400 meter has to be under 130. That third round of a 400 meter, for most people under 130, you're going to die. It's going to hurt so bad. I know, because my wife is a sprinter and I hate that shit because cardio is bad for you and I still maintain it. But that's another problem. I'm a strong man, okay? So I do anyway. That's a great cardiovascular workout. Like you want to get in shape, or you do 1K. Okay, so how did I prepare for my 5K? I do 3 rounds, 1K, max speed, which means each K had to be under 330, right? I would do it every 6 minutes or every 5.5. So 2-minute rest, 1K, under 330, go. That third K hurts like no one. The 400 meter 3 round hurts even more. Now, who is listening to this? Who is excited about doing 3 times 400 meter run as you work out for the day? No one. No one is going to do that. But honestly, this is one of the things you should do to get better. It's just, you're not going to do it because it's not interesting, and no coach is going to program that because no one is going to show up that day.
Right. That's what I was going to say. On paper, It doesn't seem like enough. On paper, you're like, that's it. That's all we're doing.
Yeah, I know. No, I know what you're saying. Trust me. But that's because you haven't done it.
Right.
By the way, I ran my 5K in 21 minutes doing that shit.
Doing those. Yeah. I mean, because the intervals, it's funny. I went to the track yesterday and it was, I did not want to do 4 repeats at 130. But on the idea of CrossFit and fitness and in general, with your background, right? You've had a pretty wide background, especially when I'm talking about martial arts and strongman and CrossFit and whatnot. What role do you think martial arts plays in all of this? What role do you think CrossFit has had? I would agree with you. I think Greg and CrossFit have done tremendous things, in particular for women and for men. Obviously, I'm a fan of the training. I think that it's super impactful. I think that 5 to 20 minute time domain is incredible. All the things, right? But how much do you think that we focus, because of the sport, on just staying in the gym to do the gym? And how much time do we need outside the gym? And what role does martial arts play to you?
Right. I think honestly, CrossFit was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Right, it changed
better than Jiu-Jitsu.
No, it was the same as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for MMA.
Okay.
So to me, CrossFit for functional fitness is the same as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for MMA. Those are things that change the world forever and will always be almost like the base of, like one of those things you have to do. Right? So it is. Now we have a methodology in that for that particular, especially time thing, that we're going to use forever. Okay, but just like Jiu-Jitsu has evolved toward what MMA is, functional fitness needs to evolve as well. So we cannot get stuck just with CrossFit as a sport, because I think that's why it's damaging CrossFit right now, is the fact that the methodology, the training system has not evolved. The L1 is pretty much the same. We still, I would like to talk about the skill element and the barbell. So we're talking about sports, for example. Let's talk about wrestling. If I use as a barbell or a sandbag, I'm sorry, the sandbag is a better tool for jiu-jitsu and wrestling than the barbell is. I know I'm going to piss off a lot of people.
No, you're kind of preaching to the choir. We actually just released a 10-week sand program because I told Gabe we need something for the side of the mats.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I love you guys. So there is a tremendous focus that should be put on that type of training as well, since we're talking functional fitness. Now, that is not the CrossFit Games. They do what they do. It's awesome. I love watching it from the beginning. That's what they do. But that's a sport, that's a specialization. We need to always separate the CrossFit, the training system, and CrossFit, the sport, which really I wish we had done from the beginning. So now we're kind of stuck with those two. So they're not going to change the barbell thing because they are linked to the CrossFit, the sport. But let's be honest, the sandbag works better for most people, for most sports. So I would like to see an evolution of CrossFit, or at least an evolution of the functional fitness realm, which is why I want to see high rocks come in, because that low skill movement for 40 minutes will work better than doing that shit with snatches and a barbell. It is what it is, right? And I want to see short stuff, not with a barbell. I want to see, and I love the CrossFit Games for that, with strongman implements and sandbag and stuff, because it's a heavy sandbag for a minute is the worst thing you've ever done in your life. It hurts everywhere, better than a barbell. But if we're talking about cycling Olympic, then the barbell is better, right? So the barbell has a place, but we need to have an evolution. And yes, I would love to see CrossFitter try actual things once in a while. Like, you can move a lot, that's great. Let's pick up a sandbag and let's go up my driveway of 150 meters. Let's see how fit you are right now, because your posterior chain is gonna scream. Stuff like that, right? Because the idea is still to train to go wrestle a bear. That's still the idea, right? So let's move toward that, and also let's test it. Maybe not against a bear, but Greg Glassman said it. You have to go do sports because you have to test to see if your fitness applies.
I know we're coming up on an hour, but how would you, in the simplest, terms, kind of explain why the sandbag is so much better than the barbell for the short things? Because I remember when Dennis had to start doing, some of the strong fit stuff. I remember like the max set bear hug squat with the 200. Just one set. That was the training we did. One set of that, and we were trying to get like 15, 20 reps, just one set. And it would absolutely ruin you in the best way that it ruined you. Like, you felt absolutely shot, but it didn't feel like a beat down. Like if you were to do, 20 reps with a back squat, right? It was very different. And we also did, the max carries and all that stuff, very short stuff that would just light you up in a just very difficult way to explain if you haven't done it. What's the difference there?
I can go into it, but that's going to take more than a minute, I'm telling you. But so, there's different levels to that. So first of all, the sandbag. So I'm going to first talk about the sandbag and then talk about the barbell. Let's say on the squat, right? So first of all, the sandbag is very close to body weight stuff, in the sense that you cannot do gymnastics without always your core being engaged a certain way. You've noticed the second you try to do stuff, all the muscles get involved, and I don't care if you're doing a simple movement like pull-ups, everything starts doing it. The sandbag is the same, because you're gonna have to squeeze the sandbag, your core has to, the whole body goes into it and you're moving as a unit. So in that sense, a functional movement, right? So it's very close to body weight in the sense of you're gonna have to engage everything, otherwise you're not doing it, Right. So if you go toward, so necessarily you engage more muscles, by the way, which means you're squeezing a sandbag. You're going to have to, your pecs are going to work and your biceps, and you have to squeeze your hand. You're just pumping energy everywhere. Your core is working 3 times as much because your obliques have to push out just to stabilize the thing. It's kind of slippery, so you have to squeeze. The amount of energy that you spend on it, by the way, it's not an easy grip either.
Yeah, it's gritty.
Like that. Yeah. Oh, it takes, by the way, Einstein was wrong. Gravity is not the same everywhere because a 200-pound sandbag is not a 200-pound barbell.
Dude, we've talked about that multiple times. Like yesterday, I was doing a workout. So I keep a sandbag in the back of my truck, and I do workouts all the time. And an 80-pound sandbag, especially doing thrusters, just ruins me.
Yes.
But dude, an 80-pound barbell wouldn't be bad at all. But all of a sudden, I get this sandbag, and it just, to your point, like it's not the same.
Take a sandbag, like a heavy sandbag, try to do a front squat, and your hips have never worked as hard in your life. Like you feel muscle in your hips you didn't know existed because it's pressing on you a very specific way. The problem with a barbell is, first of all, you're putting it on your upper back. So that means that the structure of your upper back changes your technique, which means if you start to lean this way, I'm going to have to put my hip that way, and now my whole thing is completely uncentered. Problem with too is the structure of my upper back decides how strong I am on the back squat, first of all. So as that structure starts to give up and the weight is on the spine, your nervous system will bail out really fast. So you're always going to be able to push a lot harder on the sandbag no matter what, because it's a safer movement. So that's what we call a waist scale. You know what I mean? And on top of it, the very specific leverage of a barbell allows you to put more weight on the air, and it looks great, but it's just not the same type of stress as an overall functional movement like the sandbag. So it's by the way, on a squat, you'll notice that people can relax their core on a back squat with a barbell in a way that they shouldn't, don't get me wrong, but it's not that hard to do. Do you notice you can do whatever you want with your knees on a back squat until you kill yourself, obviously, but you're allowed to. On a sandbag, you don't have a choice. You've done a thruster with a sandbag, Jason. You did whatever the sandbag told you to do.
You did whatever the sandbag told you to do. Yeah. And yes.
Back squat with a barbell, you do whatever you tell yourself to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, one thing, obviously, I think it's important to note, I think training with sand has a phenomenal stimulus. The one disadvantage to sand, that I'll just come up with, there's a bunch, but one in particular compared to a barbell is you can't load it on the back or even on the front as much because you have to get it to your back, right? They need to come up with a sandbag rack or something like that.
That's the thing. Do you want it on your back? Then we start to go into that conversation. Everything. By the way, you can't, like on the barbell, I can put 83 pounds if I want to. I can't do that on the sandbag. There's a lot of advantages to the barbell. Don't get me wrong.
For sure.
So of course, barbell is great. But so is the sandbag. It's just the sandbag sucks compared to the barbell. Like if we're talking about overall, and so when we're talking about resilience, right, mental, physical, and everything, the sandbag is better. And I can push harder in a safer way on the sandbag than I can on a barbell. That's obvious, right? So things like that make it, there's less technique, less skill. So regular people will get to the effort, the intensity faster than with a barbell. A power clean might take a while to teach. On the sandbag, I can teach it in 20 minutes, and I had grandmas doing it, and I can make them do a clean and press in 3 minutes with a sandbag. I had clients, they will never touch a barbell for that exercise, ever. Like I had clients I had a guy, he could squat a 180 sandbag for 3 reps. The guy weighed 160, he's 65 years old, right? I was like, oh my God, that is so good. I put him on a barbell with 135 once. He did 3 reps. And I was like, he's going to kill himself. So he's like, right, we went right back to the sandbag because honestly, it's a risk versus reward thing. On a sandbag like that, he looked great. On a barbell, I was like, dude, it's 5 years from now, he's 70, forget about it. It was not interesting from a risk management perspective. So the barbell is great. The sandbag, I think, is better. I'm biased, obviously, but I do things. By the way, we're talking about the functional, you can put a sandbag. I live close to the beach. I have an empty sandbag. We go to the beach, we fill it up, we do the workout, we empty it, we go back home.
Yep.
There you go. And I can do so much stuff. I can drag it, I can clean it, I can press it, I can do whatever I want.
Gabe, he's preaching to the choir on this sand thing, huh?
I mean, I'm telling you, I was introduced to it pretty early, and it was a big reason. And the thing is, looking back on it, the reason I injured my back as bad as I did was exactly what you said. I was doing a 20 rep back squat program. And I learned later, wasn't bracing my core the way I had to, because I could get away with it. You could do some sloppy things.
Yeah, and you get tired, rep 18, I got 2 more and everything. With a sandbag, you're tired, you get 2 more, you go, fuck no, I don't. But you drop it and it's over.
That's right. Yeah.
I think a lot of my training for so many years was so focused for the CrossFit Games. But once I retired from the sport and I got into jiu-jitsu, one of the reasons why I wanted to, I talked to Gabe about this is like, I find that jiu-jitsu practitioners, and I don't know if I'm sure you've seen the same thing. Like there's this old school stigma that you shouldn't be doing anything off the mat, strength and conditioning. The best way to get better at jiu-jitsu is just to do more jiu-jitsu. And I think that it's really, I think that there's more people that are coming around to the idea that you also need to do things off the mats. But sand off the mats is such a great tool because a lot of these guys don't have gyms. So you just take an 80-pound sandbag, throw it on the mats, and dude, you could do all kinds of stuff.
In a safe way.
In a very safe way.
We talk about functional movement all the time. Remember that's what CrossFit was preaching, functional movement. Nothing to me is more functional than a sandbag. So to me, actually, the sandbag training is in a way true CrossFit. Greg Glassman got a barbell because he had $5,000 and there was no sandbags back then anyway. But looking back, the way CrossFit was designed, I would think a sandbag would fit better the idea anyway. The early CrossFit Games, remember when you had to...
Yeah.
Anyway, imagine back then in the early CrossFit Games if we had sandbags. I mean, we had when you went up the hill. But if we had the sandbags that we have now that I use, man, we could have made the CrossFit Games be fun back then. Imagine how Greg Glassman would have tortured people with Dave Castro back in the day if we had the sandbags we have now. Oh, by the way, Grace with a sandbag. 130-pound sandbag, instead of 1.5 minutes, it's 5 minutes. There's so many ways to kill people with sandbag. It's amazing.
Yeah, man, you got me fired up to go do another one. I mean, I train with sand pretty much every day now because we released this 10-week training program. I'm getting ready for something called the Tactical Games, and they use a lot of sand. And so I've been training with sand basically every day. And you just got me inspired to go hit a Grace with it. I'm going to go to jiu-jitsu, and then I'm going to go hit Grace with sand. So
I have a workout for you. That's one of my worst. So you're going to grab, my wife did it with a 60 pounds. So you have to do at least, you're Jason Khalipa. You have to do 100 pounds. So there's a workout. You're going to get a 100-pound sandbag, one of mine, I hope. You're going to do 5 front squats, 5 presses, right? I want you to do it for 3 minutes without dropping the bag.
5 front squats, 5 presses.
Keep going.
Are you push press or shoulder press?
Whatever.
Just shoulder overhead.
5 squats, 5 presses, non-stop. The clock stops when you drop the bag.
What is non-stop to you? Like, can I go slow?
Don't care.
You just got to keep a 100-pound sandbag on your chest for 3 minutes.
Resting here is worse.
All right.
When your upper back starts burning, ow! This is one of the worst workouts ever. I have another one. I have 2 workouts for you. The other one is you're going to grab that 100-pound sandbag. You're going to do 5 squats. You're going to carry 50 feet. 5 squats, carry 50 feet. That for 5 minutes, you're not allowed to drop the bag.
That I remember us doing. That I remember us doing. Definitely didn't do it without dropping the bag.
For 5 minutes,
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, but are you allowed to? How do you carry it in a front
bear
rack?
hug?
Or bear hug?
Bear hug. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, man. I don't know about that one. But I like
well, the first one is worse.
Yeah, but Julia, you know what, man? This has been an awesome conversation, and people that listen to this podcast, we say this all the time, but I maybe it's a good testament to the type of guests we have on the show, is because I have so much more that I want to dive into, but. For this particular show, if people want to, find out more about you, they want to listen to more of your content, where's the best place to go? I know you have your own podcast, obviously social channels. Where's the best place to find out more about you and StrongFit?
Right now I got a website, but we're revamping everything because most of my time is starting to be devoted toward the mental health stuff and the studies and everything, and it's starting to take a lot of time. So the thing is with my partner, Mike Ramirez in LA, actually, is we have 3 gyms open now for autism. So we where we do what we do with the autism population, because you can imagine a gym is 120 families on average. So that's a lot of people we help. So we have 3, we're going to get to 5, probably more later, but I'm between that and UCLA stuff toward the new therapies where I devote most of my time. So you're going to see me less and less on social media, most likely. In the meantime, they can see me on Instagram on StrongFit1, and then from there they'll get to my website and everything. But honestly, I'll go on podcasts, but you'll see me less and less on social media. It's not a place for me anyway. But on top of it, I'm just busy doing the actual stuff. And so I still like podcasts because I still think this is what the difference is made, is exactly on podcasts like this, right? Where you can reach people. Social media, whatever, man.
I mean, we love podcasting because we get to get long form information. We get to really dive into different things. And like I said, I think with you, there's more to it, but I appreciated I wrote down obviously the idea of resiliency, acute stress. I wrote down some more additional notes, and I like what you had to share with that and your perspective on things. So I really appreciate it. Gabe, you got anything to wrap us up?
No, man, just thank you. I've been a fan and quietly hated a lot of the stuff that you create for a long time. So appreciate having you on.
Man,
pleasure. I'll be back whenever, guys.
It's been awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate you. I appreciate everyone who's been listening. As per usual, right? If you've enjoyed this show and you got value out of it, I know I have, send this podcast to a friend, right? Leave it a rating and review and add value for your friends by sharing your takeaways with this episode. Keep training hard.